Coming up on New Day at Arirang, new COVID-19 infections dropping fast in South Korea after one of the largest Omicron surges seen anywhere in the world. New daily cases still in the six figures, but down sharply from last month. From today, social distancing guidelines ease for the next couple of weeks. Western countries decry what they call horrifying war crimes in towns liberated from Russian forces. Moscow continuing its offensive in different parts of Ukraine, dropping shells on oil refineries and storage facilities. Plus, South Korea's president-elect Yoon nominates former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo as the first Prime Minister of his incoming administration. Yoon takes the reins of power in mid-May.
Hello and welcome to this Monday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on April 4th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
Over the course of the next hour, we will be taking a look at the biggest news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world. And my name is Mark Broom. We are going to start with the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. The country has seen a big drop in the number of new cases, partly due to the weekend effect when fewer people get tested, but also because infections are generally dropping overall.
And beginning today, South Korea will begin newly introduced relaxed social distancing measures for the next 2 weeks. For more on this, our reporter Choi Min-jung is here in the studio with us. Good morning, Min-jung.
Good morning.
So give us the latest on the COVID-19 situation.
Well, Mogan, we're forecast to see around 130,000 new cases today. From midnight to 9 p.m. Sunday, South Korea saw close to 128,000 cases. The number of infections dropped a whopping 104,000 cases from the same time the previous day, partly because we tend to see fewer cases on Mondays with fewer tests over the weekend. But we are still seeing a drop in the overall trend as compared to last week. There were 56,000 fewer cases. We're also seeing a drop in the 7-day daily average, that figure dropping into the 200,000s for the first time in 3 weeks.
Okay, that's good news. And revised social distancing measures have taken effect from today. Just remind us exactly what they are.
Right, Mark. Relaxed social distancing measures will be in place starting today for 2 weeks. Social gatherings will be allowed up to 10 people, regardless of vaccination status. And businesses can open until midnight. And these include restaurants, cafes, singing rooms, public baths, as well as clubs and bars. Movies and shows at theaters and concert halls may begin any time before midnight, but performances must end before 2 a.m. Meanwhile, restrictions for large events remain the same with a cap of 299 people, regardless of vaccination status. Events with over 300 spectators can be held if there is approval from relevant authorities. And rules remain the same for religious facilities as well, with a 70% capacity limit on all activities and events.
Now, Min-jung, authorities have said that they will consider lifting much of the restrictions, including the wearing of face masks outdoors, if the situation is stable for the next 2 weeks. How are people reacting to this?
Well, there has been both hope and concern, with some saying it's too early and unsafe to be not wearing masks outdoors, while others say the time has come for people to be outside without masks. Other countries that have passed the Omicron peak, like the U.S. and the UK, have already lifted outdoor mask mandates, allowing people to make their own decisions. Some health experts in Korea are also saying that the country may now remove the mandate, given the relatively low transmission rate outdoors. Kim Yoon, a professor of medicine at Seoul National University, says the risk of being infected outdoors is about a 20th compared to the risk indoors. He added that it is difficult to get infected unless you are talking closely with an infected person. So what he recommends is allowing people to make the decision for themselves when outdoors, but he strongly advises mask wearing in crowded areas, especially for older people and those in the high-risk category. Another expert, Kim Tak, professor at Soonchunhyang University, was also on board. Kim said there is no significant effect from wearing masks outside and it has relatively little impact on the virus spreading. However, experts do point out that a mask-wearing mandate for indoors should remain for now.
Okay, well, I'm sure a lot of people would be glad to see the back of the outdoor face mask mandate, especially with the summer coming up. It's very humid here in South Korea, of course. However, that could potentially change should a new variant emerge.
That's right, Mark. Experts are saying that lifting outdoor mask mandates should be reconsidered if there is a new variant. And authorities are currently closely watching a new hybrid variant called the XE variant. According to the WHO, the new COVID-19 variant has been found in the UK. And the XE variant is a hybrid version of the Omicron and stealth Omicron strain. And the health body says the mutated variant appears to be 10% more transmissible than the highly contagious stealth Omicron. XE was first detected in the UK in mid-January, and around 600 cases have been reported since then. Taiwan and Thailand also reported their first cases of the new variant, and Israel has also reported suspected cases of XE. No cases were reported in South Korea as of now. We are expecting further updates as the WHO and global health experts closely assess the health risks associated with the variant.
All right, Min-jung, thank you so much for your report. Did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, as always. Moving on now, Russia's war against Ukraine is showing no sign of slowing down, with its military attacking key oil facilities in that country.
The news comes after hundreds of dead civilians were found near the Ukrainian capital, an area where Russian forces appear to have withdrawn from. Kim Hyo-san tells us more.
Russia says it has struck what it calls critical infrastructure near Ukraine's southern port city of Odesa. The attacks on Sunday caused an oil facility in the region, the main base for Ukraine's navy, to go up in flames.
This is not a good morning for Odesa. We woke up to powerful explosions near our home. The impact was huge. There is still smoke billowing. The children were in a panic. The windows were blown in. It was terrifying.
Saying oil facilities have been a focus of their attacks, Moscow's defense ministry explained that it had struck 4 oil facilities across the country. While no casualties were reported, a local prosecutor said the bodies of 410 civilians have been recovered near the country's capital after the withdrawal of Russian forces. It added forensic experts are on the ground to examine the bodies and gather information. Against such a backdrop, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of genocide. In related news, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stressed that those responsible for war crimes must be held accountable, referring to Russia's war against Ukraine. He also noted the Biden administration believes Russian forces have committed war crimes and is helping with evidence collection. The head of the UN also expressed shock over the situation, calling for an independent investigation. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Iran's foreign minister says talks in Vienna are restoring the 2015 nuclear deal are moving closer to an agreement, but stressed the ball is now in Washington's court. According to Iran's foreign ministry's website Sunday, the minister made the remarks in a phone conversation with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Tehran's top diplomat submitted his country's proposals to the U.S. through the EU coordinator for the nuclear talks. Since April 2021, 8 rounds of talks have been held in Vienna between Iran and the other parties that made up the 2015 deal.
Food delivery services are thriving in South Korea, especially as a result of the pandemic, with far fewer people going out for a meal these days. However, more and more customers and restaurant owners are expressing their frustrations over rising delivery fees. Lee Hyun reports.
Food delivery services have accelerated in South Korea over the past few years. According to Statistics Korea on Friday, food delivery sales revenue in February saw a record high of around $65 million. But at the same time, customers are having to deal with higher delivery fees.
Until 6 months ago, I would pay 1,900 Korean won or around $1.5 delivery fee to order a sandwich. But now that I check the delivery fee again for the same store, it's gone up to 5,000 won or around $4. delivery fees has risen across the board, and many believe that they're just too high.
According to survey data released by think tank Seoul Institute on Monday, almost 80% of the respondents said they use a mobile app to order food delivery. The apps charge commission from the vendors for each order as well as for delivery, adding additional fees to the overall order. More than half of app users chose less than 2,000 won, or around $1.6, as being a reasonable delivery fee. But some have stopped using apps altogether.
The rise in delivery fees is stopping me from using delivery service apps. It costs like 5,000 won, which I think is too expensive.
Some store owners are also struggling with commission fees amid soaring delivery prices.
We offer additional perks or complimentary menu items for those customers who visit the store for takeout.
One delivery service industry insider who wanted to remain anonymous told us that the hike in delivery fees was inevitable due to an increase in demand and a lack of riders.
We're looking for ways to coexist with store owners and customers. The government also needs to talk about delivery fees while taking into consideration the delivery platforms, store owners and customers, and find ways to resolve the rider shortage issue.
Amid soaring delivery fees, some are seeking creative ways to save money. One startup company has developed a mobile app to help people who live close to each other order food from one restaurant all at once. This way, the delivery fee is shared. But one expert says he expects the industry to stabilize eventually.
As more delivery platforms are emerging, which is making the market more competitive, delivery fees and commissions are forecasted to fall and be stabilized in the long term.
He added, although the government had already said in February this year that it wanted more transparency from delivery apps, more information like commission fees should also be clearly stated before customers place their orders. Lee Hyun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. South Korea seems to be over the peak of the Omicron surge. New daily cases have been coming in at around 250,000 for the past few days. We might see under 200,000 when the official numbers are out later today. It might seem like a lot, and it is, let's be honest, but we should also keep in mind that the all-time high in South Korea was over 620,000 on March 17th.
And beginning today, the private gathering limit has been raised to 10 people from 8, and the business hour curfew on restaurants and cafes have been lifted by an hour to midnight. Health authorities are also said to be considering lifting social distancing rules and outdoor mask mandates when the revised rules expire in 2 weeks from now, given South Korea's high vaccination and infection rates. For more, we connect to Dr. Alice Tan, internist at Ms. Mary Women's Hospital in Seoul. Good morning, Dr. Tan.
Good morning.
So firstly, we'd like to get your reaction on the latest revision to the social distancing guidelines. You know, they raised the private gathering cap and extended business hours. What do you think about it?
Well, I think there's no question that transmission rates are going down. There's improvement in what's going on. But we need to remember that we're coming down from rates that were that placed us at #1 in the world for 3 consecutive weeks, and we're still having very high levels of transmission. There are about 570 new cases per 100,000 population currently in our country, which is a very high level. I think instead of putting blanket decreased restrictions throughout the country, we should be taking a more regionalized approach. There are certain regions, I think, that could tolerate these loosened measures, and other regions that are still vulnerable when there are increased transmission rates, just depending on their healthcare capacity overall. And I think we should also communicate very clearly to the public that there may be certain populations for which these loosened measures really should not be applied. For example, there may be elderly people who are at the tail end of their immunity from their 3rd dose. We don't have 4th doses eligible for the greater population yet. And we should communicate that there is a risk involved if people are gathering in large numbers and taking advantage of the later business hours. And also, I think there's also a problem in terms of accessibility to antiviral treatments. It's still very difficult to access these medications. And until these measures are improved, it may be dangerous to have these loosened measures throughout the country.
Right. Well, I kind of have a good idea what you might answer when I ask you this next question then, because when this 2-week period expires, it is thought that there's a good chance that they'll remove the outdoor face mask mandate and also potentially even just lift all the social distancing restrictions. Do you think that might actually happen? And if it does happen, what's your opinion?
Of course, this entirely depends on where we are in 2 weeks in terms of transmission levels and hospital capacity. We would need to see continued sustained improvement in the COVID situation overall in our country before we decide to lift restrictions altogether. Now, I would like to point out that in the UK, the Public Health Authority, they revised their definition of what is a close contact to being within 1 meter of a positive case, a person with COVID, for 1 minute. And if you consider the high population density in South Korea, it may be very, very difficult, even outdoors, to avoid close contact with a person with COVID, with active disease. The other, thing to consider is, unfortunately, 12 million people approximately have gotten infected with COVID recently. They have essentially gotten a booster in terms of their immunity through natural infection. So we may be able to tolerate loosened social distancing measures for maybe a month or two. But as you mentioned earlier in the program, it really does depend on what's on the horizon in terms of new variants. If we have a new variant that poses a significant risk, we may have to pull back right away. And with the current level of transmission being so high, it may be very difficult to control a new variant if it does enter our country.
Now, Dr. Tan, last week, South Korea has permitted the use of COVID-19 vaccines for kids aged 5 to 11, but it seems like only a small number of parents have registered the shots for their children. Why do you think this is so?
Well, first of all, the government has not strongly endorsed vaccination among healthy children between the age of 5 and 11. They have strongly recommended it for immunocompromised children or children with high-risk medical conditions, but not for the general public in terms of that age group. Secondly, they don't recommend vaccination for children who have been recently infected with COVID-19. And of course, during the last 6 weeks, the incidence rate of COVID among young people has been so high, it's almost 50% of that population has gotten infected with COVID recently, so making them basically ineligible for the vaccine. There's also, I think, misinformation in terms of potential side effects of mRNA vaccines in this age group, which are unfounded, and then perhaps lack of information in terms of the risks of severe disease and even death among young children. People think that children are immune to having severe disease, but that's simply not true. Of the 17 deaths that we've had among children and adolescents, 82% occurred in the last 6 weeks. And that's when the Omicron strain was dominant, of course. And so I think it's a combination of all these factors that are attributing to the low sign-up rates for vaccination.
And finally, Doctor, really the $64,000 question. If you just keep your answer brief, we're almost out of time. But do you think eventually Korea and other countries around the world will ever go back to how it was pre-pandemic?
Well, we definitely need to do a better job in terms of pandemic preparedness overall. And also we need better vaccines that are durable, that have broad immunity in terms of cross protection against variants. We also need a better surveillance system in place just in case we do need to pull back after we return to some sense of normal. I think we may just have a seasonal approach, a cold COVID flu season that runs from late fall to early spring. And perhaps it may just be the recommendation for the next coming years to just everyone wear a mask indoors during this season, just to tie us through that acute infectious phase.
Well, that sounds a little bit better than the current conditions. Well, Dr. Tan, thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The cabinet that will fill out South Korea's new administration next month under President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol will soon start to take shape. As his first prime minister, Yoon has picked former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who he said is the right person to handle the economy and national security. Han will have to be confirmed by the National Assembly, which, when Yoon takes office, will be controlled by the opposition party. Lee Kyung-eun has this report.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has picked former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo to serve as the first PM under his new government. Yoon, like past presidents, announced the choice himself on Sunday, highlighting Han's expertise on the economy and national security to top priorities of Yoon's government agenda.
경제와 안보가 하나가 된 경제 안보 시대를 철저히 대비해 나가야 합니다. 한덕수 총리 후보자는 민관을 아우르는 풍부한 경험을 바탕으로 내각을 총괄하고 조정하면서 국정과제를 수행해 나갈 적임자라고 생각합니다.
Han previously served as finance minister, prime minister, and ambassador to the U.S., playing a key role in negotiating the free trade agreement with the U.S. Han said he feels honored and a sense of responsibility at the same time, given mounting issues like the growing missile threats from the North, COVID-19, and South Korea's low birth rate. He said dialogue and communication will be a key part in solving them.
One of the key factors deciding whether policies succeed will be bipartisan cooperation and integration.
In fact, those elements were reportedly the key message Yoon had for Han during their meeting the previous night. That's because the soon-to-be main opposition Liberal Democratic Party holds a majority in the parliament, so their cooperation will be pivotal for Yoon to push through some of his main policies or changes to the law. He could get some help in that from the fact that Han has worked with two Liberal governments before. For the same reason, his confirmation could go more smoothly, which is important for Yoon.
A parliamentary hearing takes roughly 3 weeks, and our goal is to see that the Prime Minister starts working as soon as the government launches.
Yoon said the nominee for Deputy Prime Minister will be announced soon as well. Young-eun, Arirang News.
A delegation of South Korean officials sent by President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has arrived in the U.S. for a week-long trip aimed at coordinating security and foreign policies before the launch of the new administration in Seoul. Lawmaker Park Jin of the People Power Party, who's heading the 7-member delegation, said they'll convey Yoon's intention to normalize the South Korea-U.S. alliance to the Biden administration and Congress. He added they'll meet with key figures in the Biden administration, Congress, and U.S.-based think tanks to discuss ways to rebuild the alliance and develop it into a comprehensive strategic alliance.
Now we're going to cross over to our OCR for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Mark. It is indeed time for Global Insight. With just over a month to go before South Korean President-elect Yoon takes office, his people are losing no time in engaging with officials of the country's staunchest ally, the United States. Members of Yoon's Conservative People Power Party have already left for Washington. The delegation, made up of diplomatic and economic experts, will reach out to key people in the Biden administration to consult with them on policy and deliver a letter for the US president from his soon-to-be counterpart in Seoul. We discuss what will be on the agenda, as well as the future of the bilateral relationship. For this, we connect with Tobias Harris, Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress, joining us from Washington, and Mason Ritchie, Professor of International Politics at Hankuk University's Foreign Studies here in Seoul. Very warm welcome to you both. And Mr. Harris, thank you so much for joining us from Washington, D.C. It's a Sunday evening for you, so we're all the more grateful. Well, my first question is, now South Korea's President-elect Yoon his party members, they're already in Washington. The delegation is being led by Park Jin. And, well, first of all, what purpose will this trip serve, and how do you expect the Biden administration to get along with this incoming Yoon government?
Great. Well, thank you for having me. You know, you have a Biden administration that made very clear during the President Biden made clear during the campaign that cooperation with allies was going to be a top priority for his foreign policy. We have seen him put that into action as president. We've also seen him really prioritize the Indo-Pacific region in his foreign policy, notwithstanding, a major crisis in Europe. I mean, you've still seen a lot of focus from senior officials on Asia and making sure that Asian partners are involved in that crisis. And so I think there's a lot of interest from the Biden administration in ensuring that there's a smooth transition to the Yoon administration. You know, I think, of course, we saw last year when President Moon was in Washington that you had a joint statement that was very ambitious. I think you're going to want the Biden administration is going to very much want to find opportunities to build on that joint statement and to find continuing cooperation with the new Korean administration. I mean, I think they're very interested in opportunities that the new administration presents, given what President-elect Yoon emphasized on the campaign and his focus on the United States. And so I think this is really more about opportunities rather than damage control, let's say.
And Professor Ritchie, well, what do we know about Mr. Park Jin, who is leading this delegation, and what does the composition of this group really tell us about the kind of relationship that they're trying to build with people in Washington?
Sure. So Representative Park Jin is a known quantity. He's highly respected. He has tons of connections in Washington. He's a rock-solid U.S. ROC alliance supporter. He's experienced both in the Blue House and also as the former chairman of the National Assembly Foreign Affairs Committee. He also, in addition to security, has expertise in trade as well. He's also known as being tough on North Korea, like many in his party are, although I think he has a diplomatic bent as well. And I think all of those things serve him well in terms of taking the lead on this delegation. The other people going with him include Cho Tae-yong, who also is an experienced National Assembly lawmaker, former Ministry of Foreign Affairs Vice Foreign Minister. He's also very well known in Washington, D.C. I think where things get interesting on this delegation is when you look at some of the accompanying members. Representative Cho and Park Jin are sort of obvious candidates for this. But along with them went Professor Chung Jae-ho from Seoul National University, who's a China expert, and Park Chol-hee, also from Seoul National University, who's a Japan expert. I think those are really going to be names and reflect something that's going to be sort of music to Washington's ears. I think bringing a China expert along indicates that the Yoon administration incoming is going to be interested in working with Washington more on China than perhaps was the case with the Moon administration. It also sends a message to China as well, not so subtle diplomatic message, especially since it doesn't look like there's going to be a similar delegation going to Beijing, one notes. And also Washington's very interested in trilateral U.S. ROC Japan relations, and so sending a Japan expert, I think, also sends a very positive message to Washington.
And Mr. Harris, of course, the biggest common issue for Seoul and Washington is dealing with nuclear North Korea. And, well, where do the People Power Party and the Biden administration stand on North Korea? Do you think we're going to see more coordination?
Well, I mean, I think there's a real question of just in terms of where North Korea is in terms of the Biden administration's priorities right now. I mean, I think you have, of course, activity as far as testing is concerned from the North Korean regime, but of course, the Biden administration has its hands full as far as Ukraine is concerned. And so, right now, I think as far as the Biden administration's approach, I mean, it's very much taking, it's not calling it strategic patience, but it very much looks like that, where not panicking over these tests, it's sort of accepting that it's there, making clear that the offer to talk is open, but not really offering real, substantive concessions that I think would change the negotiating environment, and that status quo seems likely to continue. So, I mean, I think having a new South Korean administration that is, prepared to take, I think, a harder line on North Korea won't necessarily be out of step with the Biden administration. The question is, what would happen if, for some reason, there was a diplomatic opening? Does coordination become more difficult at that point? But I don't think really right now the outlook suggests that we're going to see that anytime soon. And so things will likely, my guess would be that they'd be smooth.
And Professor Ritchie, South Korea and the United States are expected to strengthen their bilateral alliance under the Yoon administration. And the president-elect has mentioned placing additional anti-missile defense systems here in the country. Do you think North Korea's recent ICBM provocations will really, strengthen the case for this?
Not directly. North Korea's ICBMs aren't intended to target South Korea. They're an alliance wedge. They are a deterrent to the U.S. Becoming involved in and escalating conflict on the Korean Peninsula. They are there to weaken the U.S. role in providing South Korea extended nuclear deterrence by making the U.S. president, in the case of a conflict that goes totally sideways and gets out of control, choose between San Francisco and Busan. Indirectly, however, yes, I think they do support, at least for, the Republican Party and well, frankly, even also the Biden administration in Washington, as well as for the PPP here, the introduction of additional missile defense assets. North Korea's ICBMs indirectly shape the North Korea threat. And fit into the North Korea threat in terms of the U.S. ROC alliance, and these ICBMs, they heighten the security risk on the peninsula, and therefore justify missile defense assets here. We've already heard talk about an additional THAAD battery around Seoul for some protection for important places in Seoul. Additional Patriot missile batteries, you can imagine them coming on the peninsula, as well as the standard missiles that are part of the layered missile defense assets. Plus, of course, South Korea's own systems, such as potentially the imported Iron Dome system and indigenous systems for dealing with the North Korean artillery. All those indirectly, I think, are supported by North Korea's progressing ICBM program.
And Professor Ritchie, well, North Korea has certainly been the biggest headache for South Korea and the United States over the past decades. But in a recent Asan Institute survey conducted last year, it showed that fewer Koreans now believe the South Korea-U.S. alliance should be solely based on North Korea issues than in previous years. How do you see the scope of their relations expanding?
So in the first place, we've seen in a foreign affairs article by the Yoon administration, at that point still candidate Yoon, and his team show interest in cooperation with the Quad through Quad Plus, as to say with the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. That could include primarily, I think, non-traditional security areas such as vaccines and climate change. As well as perhaps supply chain diversification. The larger U.S. free and open Indo-Pacific concept, I think we can expect greater involvement in updating what the Moon administration called the New Southern Policy on Southeast Asia. Whatever the Yoon administration will call it, I'm not sure. that will dovetail with the U.S. free and open-ended Pacific concept, and I think will probably be more assertive in doing that. We can expect cooperation in space, which is already ongoing. Civilian nuclear cooperation between the U.S. and South Korea may increase. The Moon administration was operating a nuclear phase-out policy for civilian nuclear reactors. The Yoon administration will reverse that, and that could open up some civilian nuclear cooperation for export of nuclear stations abroad, for instance. Pharma, biohealth, and bioscience. I think we'll expect human rights to be a bit more on the agenda, a bigger defense of the liberal model. And then, of course, Ukraine and Russia. I think the U.S. will expect and hope that South Korea will take more of a vocal role in decrying what's happening in Ukraine and putting increased pressure on Russia.
And Mr. Harris, the same question to you as well. How do you see the South Korea-U.S. alliance evolving or expanding?
We heard, I think, a long, I think, wish list of what we've seen, and a lot of that, of course, was reflected in the joint statement of last year. I really want to stress, the importance of improving trilateral relationships with Japan as well as South Korea, and building those ties. And I think it's really an area where I think Washington is anxious and I think maybe hopeful about the kind of rhetoric that we've heard from President-elect Yoon during the campaign and more recently. And, I think it's certainly an encouraging sign that he's bringing Professor Park with him to Washington. But I really think, you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy they released several weeks ago, there was a list of action items, and very high on that list was improving trilateral cooperation and really trying to fix the Japan-South Korea relationship. And so I think you're going to have a lot of effort from the Biden administration on that question, and really trying to find a concrete way to get both of the allies thinking in a more future-oriented way, finding areas of common interest, finding areas to cooperate, whether it's hard security or whether it's development, public health, economics, whatever the issue area is. I think really trying to find concrete ways that Tokyo and Seoul can really start working together, I think is really going to be high on the list for the Biden administration.
And in addition to working on South Korea's relationship with Japan, it looks like Mr. Yoon will have to recalculate Korea's strategy towards China as well. And Professor Ritchie, how do you think the president-elect is going to handle the US-China rivalry? How far do you think he's going to go in order to support the US in its Indo-Pacific initiatives?
This is the $10,000 question, or more than likely the 10 or 20 or $100 billion question. To some degree, Yoon is a black box on foreign policy, even though his team, including obviously Park Jin, who's in Washington, also Kim Sung-han, who's on the transition committee, Kim Tae-hyo, those are all pretty well-known quantities. But Yoon himself, who will be making these decisions at the highest levels on the strategic interaction between South Korea and China, is a bit of an unknown quantity on foreign policy. And I think, frankly, his ability to push back on some of the more problematic aspects of China's behavior in the region, and with respect to South Korea in particular, will depend in part on events. As I said, I think the delegation from the incoming Yoon administration to Washington really represents a tilt towards D.C., and I think that that's an early message, a sort of diplomatic, very mild, but nonetheless a noticeable shot across the bow, or at least a signal in the direction of Beijing. But of course, Beijing isn't going to sit there and simply take it. At some point, they're going to react. It might be diplomatically, it might be economically, it might be through other means, perhaps in North Korea. And I think how the Yoon administration responds to China asserting what it considers to be its prerogatives in the region and with respect to the Korean Peninsula is going to be a very interesting question. And we don't really know the answer to that yet. So I think this will be one of the biggest things that we'll have to keep an eye on going forward.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Harris, well, President Biden announced the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework last October as Washington's signature economic policy for the Asia region. And there haven't been too many details yet, but what do we know so far, and where does South Korea stand in this?
Well, I think South Korea is certainly on a list of partners that the United States has approached and consulted with as far as the negotiating partners for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But I think there's still a lot of work internally going on within the administration, lots of consultations with experts outside of the administration, and really trying to figure out what exactly a realizable, implementable, on a quick timetable. I mean, I think the administration really wants to move quickly on this, what the details of that actually look like. And so it very much is a work in progress. I think if, for example, U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai was testifying in both houses of Congress this past week. Very unclear. A lot of questions about what exactly they're going to do. They've taken market access off the table, which I think raises some big questions about how exactly they're going to entice some partners, particularly some of the more developing countries in the region, to join the framework and to join the negotiations. And so, no, frankly, at this point, we're still really waiting to see what exactly the administration wants to include in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and then what it's prepared to really offer its trading partners, including countries like Japan and South Korea, in terms of bringing this over the finish line. And I think digital is going to be a big priority, but beyond that, I think it's really hard to say what exactly is going to be in it.
Well, that was Tobias Harris, Senior Fellow at the Centre for American Progress, and Mason Ritchie, Professor of International Politics at the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, with K-pop stars BTS among the nominees for Best Pop Duo/Group Performance at the 64th Grammy Awards for their mega hit Butter, eyes are on whether they can pick up the prize for the first time. The ceremony will start in Las Vegas in about an hour from now. This is the second time BTS has been in contention for a Grammy following their previous nomination in 2021. However, they'll perform at the event for a third time. Other nominees in their category include Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber and Coldplay. The advent of cutting-edge ICT technology has transformed the music industry in recent years. Singers can perform and meet with their fans up close in the metaverse. And now there are even so-called virtual artists who live and perform inside of this virtual world. Our Song Yoo-jin went to meet with one of them and files this report.
안녕하세요, 여러분. 세계로 우주로 뻗어나가고 싶은 버추얼 아티스트 아포키입니다.
She may look like a character from a Disney movie, but she's actually a virtual K-pop artist. APOKI introduced herself to the public through her YouTube channel 3 years ago and started gaining recognition after her K-pop cover song and dance videos went viral. Last year, she realized her dream of becoming a singer, releasing her debut single, Get It Out. Over the course of a year, she released 3 albums and now has nearly 300,000 YouTube subscribers and over 3 million TikTok followers. To connect with her fans and audience worldwide, APOKI made her first radio appearance on Arirang's very own Super K-pop show on Wednesday. During the hour-long segment, APOKI talked about the journey leading up to her debut, performed one of her songs, and answered questions from listeners. After the show, I had the chance to speak with APOKI myself and asked her experience on Arirang Radio.
네, 제가 저의 인사말로 세계로 우주로 뻗어나가고 싶다고 말씀을 드렸는데요. 아리랑이 이제 전 세계에 송출되는 프로그램이잖아요. 그래서 일단 세계로 나가는 한 걸음을 열어주셔서 제가 너무너무 감사드리고 정말 즐거운 경험이었습니다.
The virtual K-pop artist says she has and is hoping for more exciting plans to come.
지금 신곡 준비를 하고 있거든요. 그래서 여러분들이 불러주시면은 노래도 광고도 모델도 열심히 하고 싶으니까 많이 찾아주셨으면 좋겠고 또 제가 방금 말씀드린 곧 나올 앨범 많이 사랑해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
Industry insiders predict virtual artists like APOKI will help K-pop captivate more fans, especially among the younger generation.
I mean, I'm also a music writer myself, and it's something that I've looked into a lot. I think yes, because a lot of the new audience, I'm talking about generation of kids who are teenagers. I know they are really involved in virtual worlds and things like that. So I think for them, it's natural to be in connection with a virtual artist.
Virtual artists are on their way to opening new trends and culture in the K-pop industry. 송유진, Arirang News.
We are about 15 years into the age of the smartphone, and just about everyone has sent or received emoticons when texting. South Korea now has a thriving emoticon industry, creating jobs and income for designers and programmers. Kim Bo-kyung has the story.
This picture does the job of several words. Emoticons, or emojis as they are known elsewhere, have become a necessity during our Talks on Messenger programs.
Emoticons have been key to digital communication for over a decade. They deliver our emotions, nuances, and even what we want to say. But it is more than just that. Emoticons are creating jobs, intellectual property, and even loyal fans, having become a huge industry.
Ever since Korea's leading messaging app KakaoTalk introduced emoticons in 2011, the service and its related industry has grown rapidly. According to KakaoTalk's data released last year, 220 billion emoticons were sent in the first 10 years of the service, and more than 300,000 emoticons have been created. The sales revenue in those 10 years was around $580 million. But most importantly, these emoticon services have created jobs for more than 10,000 artists who are catching global users' eyes. According to the global matching platform Steepop, the number of Korean creator-made stickers being downloaded has increased by 27 times, from around 24,000 in 2018 to 648,000 in 2021.
I think the reason behind that is that because Korea has been a very heavily sticker-using country for the past over a decade, almost a decade now, and has enabled the creators to compete with one another, follow up with the fastly changing trends, and now they're capable of creating one of the most usable stickers in the world.
Stickers or emoticons are a form of intellectual property that can be turned into all kinds of merchandise. The monetization model has further diversified as messaging platforms began purchasing sticker licenses to have them featured within their application, and as brands began using them as part of their advertising tools. As emoticons become a new way to earn money, local governments are coming up with programs to support beginners. This center in Eunpyeonggu district lets trainees get to know the whole process of being an emoticon creator. The expert says, however, that more efforts should be made for emoticon designers.
Creative sectors such as being a YouTuber, a social media marketer, and an emoticon creator heavily depend on one's own capability, but there's no site to learn. Most of them learn from private institutions and YouTube. If the government provides more support, and if there's even a major at universities, the industry would grow faster.
An emoticon is no longer just an extra way to share feelings. It has now become a huge industry, showing Korean creators' design skills and ideas and creating jobs and income. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Now we're going to take a look at news from around the world, and for that we turn to our Lee Seung-jae, who's standing by at our Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Now let's start with the U.S., where a gunman in California has killed 6 people and injured several more.
That's right. So the Sacramento police are asking for the public's help in finding the gunman who killed 6 people while injuring 10 others in downtown Sacramento. Now, according to police reports, a large crowd was gathered in the area when gunfire erupted at around 2 a.m. Sunday, although it's unclear whether the crowd was connected to any particular venue or event in the area. However, the crime scene was within a few blocks of several notable landmarks, including the California State Capitol and the City Hall. Now, the death toll makes it the worst mass shooting in modern Sacramento history, while no other single mass shooting in the United States this year resulted in more deaths. At least 14 people are dead, including 7 children, after days of heavy rainfall triggered massive flooding and landslides in Rio de Janeiro. The heavy rains began Thursday with the volume of rain registered in the last 48 hours, marking the highest on record in the area. Authorities are also in search of more than 10 people missing. Rio de Janeiro has especially been hit hard by inclement weather over the past few weeks, as landslides and flooding killed some 240 people in roughly 1 month in the northern metropolis region. Now, despite the government imposing a curfew, protesters took to the streets of Sri Lanka's capital on Sunday to demonstrate against an unprecedented economic crisis.
There is no gas, there is no petrol, there is nothing to eat, there is no medicine. What can we do? If this continues, we will have to jump into the sea.
Now, on Friday, the country's president declared a state of emergency as the island nation grapples with rising prices, shortages of essentials, and rolling power cuts. Now, critics say the roots of the crisis lie in economic mismanagement by successive governments that amass huge budget shortfalls and a current account deficit. And finally, the Taliban supreme leader on Sunday issued a ban on the cultivation of narcotics in Afghanistan, the world's biggest opium producer. The announcement came during a press conference held by the Ministry of Interior, with all violators to see their crops destroyed immediately and be dealt with according to Sharia law. Now, the ban also includes production, use, or transportation of other narcotics. Now, the Taliban had banned poppy cultivation during their previous period in power as they sought international legitimacy, but faced backlash later changed their stance. Now, Afghanistan's opium production was estimated to be worth $1.4 billion at its height in 2017.
Good morning. Early spring weather is in full swing, though cold snaps in the mornings and evenings have delayed cherry blossoms bloom in the capital to this week. So yeah, they should start to bloom this week and hit their peak from the 9th to the 17th. And for today, wide gaps in readings between lows and highs continue, so we'll need to dress accordingly. And it's unfortunate that those of us in the capital and Chungcheong provinces will have to deal with high levels of ultrafine dust all day long on this fine spring day. Morning temperatures are similar to last Friday morning under sunny skies, but highs will rise fast from these chilly morning temperatures. Readings will be around the norms by the afternoon, and southern regions will be slightly warmer, topping out at 20 degrees Celsius in Daegu and Gwangju. Changeable conditions remain in the pattern for early April, while the longer days and higher sun angle will continue. And by the end of the month, perhaps we could even feel a brief hint of summer. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Now that's all we have for now, but we'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time Tuesday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
Yes, thank you as always for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.